in the oldest university in the world, where the stones remember Sanskrit and the library rewrites itself at night. Two scholars chased the same light until one of them reached into the dark instead and found a manuscript that should not breathe. She spoke a name, and from the space between letters, between desire and consequence, he came. A demon king who has watched empires fall, and the curse that knows exactly what burns between enemies who are quite not. Trishna, some hungers are never meant to be fed. Before the curse, before the betrayal, before the demon learned her name, there was only Priya. She arrived at Gurukul Akshadip in the month of Shravan, when the monsoon turned the sandstone corridors amber and the marigolds grew wild between the ancient pillars. The university was not young. Its arches remembered dynasties. Its walls exhaled Sanskrit like breath. Carved beauty watched from every cornice, and the great library that it heard was rumored to hold texts that rewrote themselves at night. Priya was the girl in blue sari, gold trimmed and precise, her hair pinned with a white champa flower her mother had passed on to her at the gate. She moved through the corridors like someone who had already memorized the layout from scrolls alone. She probably had. She was from the first morning, the one that professors looked at twice. Meera arrived the same day, the girl with dark, wild curls and green sari, who had somehow already charmed the gatekeeper into letting her bring an entire satchel of unsanctioned manuscripts inside. She laughed loudly in the welcome hall and argued with the senior scholar about the translation of a Vedic verse. She was right, which made it worse. They found each other in the library at midnight the first week, both reaching for the same text on tantric geometry. Their fingers touched the spine at the same moment. They laughed. They stayed until the lamps burnt low. They became, in the way of brilliant lonely girls finding brilliant lonely girls, immediate and absolute friends. They studied together, decoded ancient riddles together, translated texts that defeated scholars twice their age. The professors called them the twin fire. Where Priya brought structure and flawless classical knowledge, Meera brought instinct, an uncanny, almost frightening ability to feel what a text meant before she understood why. Neither of them noticed that they were almost each other's shadow. Neither noticed the quiet accumulation of small jealousies. The scholarship Priya won by a single point, the public praise Meera received from the institution Priya had laid the groundwork for, and the mentor, Professor Acharya, who seemed to love them equally but smiled at Meera one fraction longer. Neither noticed until the notice board announced the prize, the single greatest honor Akshadip conferred, and only one name could be engraved. The year the friendship ended, Meera's name went on the board. Priya's smile was perfect. Hands clasped behind her back, shook for days. The rivalry once born grew in silence. It was more dangerous that way. Meera watched Priya rise, watched her become the professor's first choice, the student whose name was spoken in the senior chambers. the scholar whose translations were copied into the university's official archive. And something old and hungry woke in Mira that she did not name and could not quiet. She began to spend her evenings not in the great library, but in the sub-vaults, the sealed lower levels where Akshadeep kept the text he did not teach. Texts written not in clean Sanskrit, but in the older, darker script that preceded it, the language of want. She told herself she was doing research. The manuscript found her in the third week of her searching. It did not glow or tremble or display itself dramatically. It was simply, suddenly, in her hand, bound in something that was not leather, warm as if it had been held recently. The title read in archaic Vedic Sanskrit, Tamas Bandha, the binding of dark hunger. It was not a spell of destruction. It was technically a curse of transference. Whatever the caster desired most, success, recognition, love, power, it could be transferred from a named target to the caster through a ritual of exact precision. The text promised this with scholarly serenity. What the text did not mention, what was written only in the margin in much later hand, in the trembling script of someone who had survived, was the cost. Every curse of desire must pass through something. The manuscript, of course, had to pass through something. The manuscript had a passenger, an intelligence, a king who had been sleeping inside the hunger of every person who had ever opened this text and wanted what was not theirs. Mira did not read the margin. Mira read only what she wanted to read. This too is a form of magic, the most dangerous kind. She prepared the ritual at the dark of the moon. Ashtabandha paced on the stone floor, a yantra drawn in copper powder, his geometry exact as mathematics and ancient as grief. She spoke the invocation at the hour of the three-way crossing of midnight, when the boundaries between desire and consequence became porous. She spoke Priya's name. The candles didn't go out. They went blue. The air in the sub-vault thickened, not with smoke, but with presence. A vast, amused, ancient awareness unfurling from the center of the yantra, like a man waking from a sleep he had chosen. The temperature dropped, not as cold, but as the absence of warmth. The way deep space is not cold, but simply indifferent to heat. Mira had expected the feeling of power flowing toward her, but she felt ice instead. He did not appear all at once. He assembled himself. Indigo skins, horns curling like a crown that was never ceremonial armor, but simply the shape of what he was. Golden hair catching the blue candlelight, layered gold at his throat. He was dressed in the manner of a king from a court that no longer existed. He looked at the yantra with the expression of a scholar examining someone else's work. He looked at Mira. He smiled. "You called me correctly," he said, in Sanskrit, so old it felt like being spoken to from inside the earth. "Almost no one does," you're precise, but you're also mistaken what you have summoned. Mira could not speak. Her tongue had forgotten how to form words in the presence of something that had watched Sanskrit being invented. The demon king tilted his head. He was reading her, not her face, but something underneath it, something that pulsed. You wanted to take something from a girl in blue sari, but that is not what your desire is. Your desire is to be her equal. Those are not the same wish. The curse you have cast is imprecise. Imprecision, he added almost gently, has consequences. He stepped from the yantra, which should have been impossible. The binding geometry was exact, and the manuscript in Mira's hand turned to ash without heat. And somewhere above them, in the sleeping university, Priya woke from a dreamless sleep with the absolute certainty that someone had spoken her name. He moved through Akshadeep like a thought no one had finished thinking. He did not destroy. He did not demand. He simply observed. He walked the sandstone corridors that remembered dynasties and found them faintly amusing, the way a river founds a dam faintly amusing. He sat in the rafters of the great library and read every text simultaneously, the way water reads the shape of a vessel. He watched Priya. He had been watching her in the sense since Mira had spoken her name, but the speaking had been a door, not an introduction. He had known of Priya before. He had known of all the brilliant, precise, quietly wounded ones who had passed through these walls across centuries. They called to him the way certain frequencies call to certain instruments. He did not interfere. He was patient, the way mountains are patient, not because she was grieving, but it was the desire. She was not just precise, but she was grieving as he understood. The girl in blue sari was grieving without knowing it, for the friendship she had lost, for the recognition that kept arriving a moment after she needed it, for some version of herself she had expected to become and hadn't yet. He recognized grief of that particular shape. He had worn it once. The curse Mira had attempted was not broken by his departure from the yantra. It was transformed, redirected. Instead of flowing from Priya to Mira, it now moved through the university itself, through the walls, through the old carved stone, to the places where Akshadeep's own magic ran in channels the current scholars had forgotten. The university began to behave strangely. The texts recopied themselves in reversed ink. The astronomical instruments in the upper towers began tracking a star that did not appear on any chart. The great courtyard fountain ran with water that was warm and faintly luminescent. Students reported dreams of a court they had never seen, a king they had never met, a battle from before the memory of any living mythology. Professor Acharya summoned Priya. He was old and exact and had spent 40 years refusing to believe in anything he could not source. He placed before Priya a fragment of the ash that had been Mira's manuscript, a rubbing of the yantra geometry from the sub-vault floor, and a translation problem he could not solve. She solved it in 11 minutes. He watched her hands move over the fragment as if reading through her fingertip. And he thought, not for the first time, that this girl's gift was not knowledge, but contact. She did not read texts, she touched them. There is a presence in this building, she said. Old, intelligent, not hostile, but not safe either. I need to find the source. He did not tell her that he had summoned Mira, and Mira did not come. Priya began her investigation in the sub-vault that night. She had a brass lamp, 3 sandalwood sticks, and the particular quality of attention that the Demon King had already identified as remarkable. She worked methodically through the chamber, reading the residue of the yantra, identifying the script, and cross-checking the geometry. She was good. She was very, very good. She found the answer in 40 minutes. She identified the curse class, the ritual origin, the text family, and the approximate age of the invocation. What she had not expected was to look up from her notes and find him standing in the corner, arms folded, watching her work, with an expression that was not threatening, but was absolutely unsettling. The expression of someone who knows the answer to a test, watching a student approach from an unexpected, rather interesting angle. You're better than her, he said. You have always been better. You simply have not stopped performing for an audience that left yet. Priya did not drop her lamp. She was a scholar of Akshati. She handled herself. She looked at him. The indigo skin, the horns, the ancient jewelry that was not ornament but taxonomy, and said in the precise, somewhat clipped Sanskrit she used when she was frightened and refusing to show it. You are Tamas Mitra, the one the Tamas Bandha carries. You have no form without curse's host. He tilted his head, and that smile again. The smile that had watched empires decide they were immortal. Mostly correct, he said. I have no obligation without the curse, host. I have had form for inconsiderably longer than the manuscript had existed. Then, and this was the moment Priya would replay for the rest of her life, he sat down cross-legged on the vault floor across from her, the way a fellow student might, and said, "Shall we solve this together? You have the methodology. I have the original source material. Between us, we might finish before the university kills anyone." She should have said no. She was aware she should have said no. But she opened her notebook. They worked through the night. She asked questions. He answered with the precision of someone who had been present at the events in question. He asked her once when she cared so much about recovering something a rival had tried to use against her. She paused over her stylus for a long moment and said, "Because the curse is the building, it's in the building. The building is full of students. They have nothing to do with whatever Mira and I." She stopped. They should not suffer for someone else's wound. He said quietly, "That is the correct answer. The only correct answer I have been waiting for someone to give it for 300 years. She did not ask what had happened 300 years ago. She understood from his tone that it was not a story he told no one. Just before dawn, he looked up from the particular difficult passage and found him watching her. Not her work, but her. The blue sari, the champa flower still impossibly in her hair. The way her brow creased when a translation refused to yield. He looked away. When she met his eyes, this was the most surprising thing he had done since manifesting. Mira had not been idle. She had understood after the night in the sub-vault, but the curse was not. It had relocated, and if she could not redirect it through the text, she could redirect it through the source, through him. She has spent the days since his appearance, not in terror, but in research. This too was her gift, the ability to feel the shape of a solution before she found it. She found the secondary invocation in a text, so old it was kept not in the vault, but in the gap between two walls, in the east tower, where a frightened scholar had hidden it in the reign of Aurangzeb. The secondary invocation did not summon the demon king, it commanded him. It required a living anchor, a person at the center of the yantra, who carried the original desire. The desire in this case was Mira's. The command was simple: redirect the curse entirely to Priya. Not transfer desire, transfer ruin. She drew the second yantra in the open courtyard, at the hour when the university was between bells and between shifts of the night watch. The fountain's luminescent water caught the geometry and made it glow. She was even now technically brilliant. The yantra was exact. And she spoke the command. He came, but not as she had expected, not slowly, not ceremonially. He arrived the way a decision arrives, sudden, complete, and irrevocable. He looked at the yantra. He looked at Mira. He looked up at the east window where Priya, drawn by some alarm she could not name, stood with a lamp held high, looking. Something shifted in him. Not anger. Anger was too simple. What moved across his ancient face was something closer to recognition. The particular sorrow of watching the same story begin to end the same way it had always ended. He had seen this before. The brilliant student, the wounded pride, the text that promised remedy and delivered only acceleration. He had been once on both sides of it. You cannot command what you have not understood, he said to Mira, and you did not understand me. Mira raised her hand, the invocation on her tongue, and he moved. It was not violence as the epics describe it, not divine, but the clash of the armies. It was precise. It was the counter word to her invocation, spoken in a register below human hearing, in the language of the curse itself. It was the closing of a circle that should never been opened. The command yantra shattered. The copper powder flew outward in a ring around Mira. The curse, the real curse, the one that had been living in Akshadip's walls for the 3 weeks now, gathered itself and returned to the original point. The original point was the desire that had summoned it. The desire belonged to Meera. She did not burn, she did not dissolve in fire or darkness, or any of the dramatic ends that ancient texts assign to those who misuse tamas bandha. The curse simply completed itself. It took from her the one thing she had used to seek, her gift, her instinct, the uncanny ability to feel the hurt of a text before understanding it. It was in the quiet way, exact. The dark hunger had asked for everything she had reached for and could not earn. In the end, it took what she had actually possessed. She collapsed without a sound, folded to the courtyard stones, and did not rise. Priya was already running. She reached the courtyard in bare feet, the lamp abandoned. She knelt at Pira's side and looked up at him. He had not moved. He stood in the ruined geometry of the yantra, the gold of his jewelry catching the pre-dawn light. And he was watching Priya with that expression she had first seen in the subvault and had not yet found a name for. Is she alive? The curse is not a death sentence, with its originator survives it. She will wake, she will be different, but she will wake. Priya looked down at Meera, at the girl she had studied beside for 2 years, whose laughter had once been the thing she organized her days around. She felt the full weight of the years, the friendship, the fracture, the wound beneath the rivalry, and under all of it, the original love that existed before any prize was announced. She wept, not dramatically, just quietly, the way the river weeps into the sea without performance, without apology. He sat beside her, not closed, simply present, the way he had been present in the vault, in the way of someone who knows that some griefs should not be witnessed from a distance. They sat in the courtyard as the sky shifted from indigo to violet, to the particular shade of copper that precedes the Indian dawn. The fountain's luminescence faded. The university's walls exhaled. Something old and tense and 3 weeks held released itself. After a long time, Priya said, "You could have let the command work. The curse would have gone to me. You would have been free." He was quiet. "I could have. I have had many opportunities across many centuries to resolve things at someone else's cost. I find I have grown particular about whose cost I accept." She looked at him. He was looking at the fountain. There was something in his profile, in the light, something that was not Demon King and not ancient intelligence, and not the terrifying presence of the subvault, but simply someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had this morning set it down. "But what were you before the curse made you this?" "A scholar," he said, "at a place not unlike this one, in a time where the stones were new." She nodded. She had known. She had known since the night in the vault when he sat across from her on the floor and opened her notebook with the automatic care of someone for whom books are not objects. She did not ask what loss had made him what he was. He understood. She did too. From the shape of how he did not answer, that it was a story he had not yet decided to give her, and that the not yet was itself a kind of trust. Mira's chest rose and fell in the glowing light. The university began to wake around them. Bells, footsteps, the smell of morning rice and cardamom. Priya looked at the demon king, who had chosen her. Not possession, not consumption, but choosing. The protective instinct of someone ancient that had learned at great cost the difference between hunger and love. You simply have not yet stopped performing for an audience that left. She thought about this, what he said in the vault. He reached over her, she did, without ceremony, placed their hands over each other, indigo against gold brown, cold ancient skin against warm human warmth. He looked at each other. She did too. He did not smile, his centuries-old smile of amusement at human folly. He smiled the other one, the one she had not seen yet, smaller and quieter and entirely unguarded, the smile that had been waiting inside the demon king for the entire length of impossibly long solitude. Mira woke 3 days later in the infirmary. She could read Sanskrit. She could not feel it though. The difference was, she would say years later, like going from music to mathematics, both true, one alive. She wept for this. She was allowed to. Priya sat beside her bed for most of those 3 days. They were not friends again. There was something more complicated than that. Two people who had known each other at their best and their worst, who had survived a demon and a curse and themselves, who would spend the rest of their long lives in the careful, deliberate work of becoming trustworthy to each other again. The demon king did not leave, not immediately. He stayed in the university in the manner of someone who had discovered, with some surprise, that he no longer wishes to return to solitude. He was not enrolled. He was not on any official record. He simply appeared in the library at odd hours, in the sub-vault, when something required translating, and in the courtyard at dawn when Priya came to think. Professor Acharya, who was old enough to have stopped being surprised by things, noted in his private journal only, the presence in the building had resolved, the guest remains. He is, I think, a scholar. He treats the text with appropriate respect. I have decided not to inquire further. And Priya, precise Priya, structured Priya, the girl who had always performed for audiences that left, began slowly and then completely to stop performing. She studied, she translated, she argued with an ancient demon about the meaning of obscure Vedic transparent passages at 3 a.m, while rain fell on the sandstone corridors and the marigolds grew between the pillars. She was at last entirely herself, and there was someone there to see it.